Welcome everybody to the latest installment of CSSW's Writing Lives Roundtable series, in which our wonderful, accomplished colleagues who you see on the screen here take part in discussions about their lives as writers, describing their approaches, their challenges, and their strategies for success. And today we have a very exciting faculty panel for a discussion about their experiences using generative artificial intelligence, AI, in their writing and in their research. Now, AI tools, as you know, have become increasingly advanced and integrated since the public release of Chat GPT, which is already just over a year ago, I think. Our panelists will offer their invaluable perspectives as we consider how AI-assisted writing has already begun to shape social work research, practice, and education. So I'd like to take a moment to give special thanks to our CSSW Writing Center Director, Adam Pellegrini, and also my wonderful colleague, Professor Jean Gao, for organizing this important panel and many like it, and for all they do for our community. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today. Your presence affirms that you too see writing as an essential part of social work practice across fields and methods, and as a tool for advocacy while securing support for projects that will meaningfully impact the populations with whom we engage. So we hope today's discussion affords you new strategies for success in your writing lives and to inspire writing that contributes to meaningful change. So now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce each of our distinguished panelists, and then I'll spring a question on them about their writing lives. But first up, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Melissa Dupont-Reyes. Dr. Dupont-Reyes is Assistant Professor of Sociomedical Sciences and Epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health. She's trained as a psychiatric and social epidemiologist who centered her research on issues of mental health equity. Her research seeks to understand how early prevention of mental illness stigma among adolescents may help reduce disparities in mental health care access and utilization. A self-professed data nerd, Dr. Dupont-Reyes has developed an applied introductory quantitative course at the Mailman School and is collaborating with us here at CSSW on a course in community mental health. Welcome. Next, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Aparna Balasundaram, an adjunct lecturer here at CSSW, one of our faculty colleagues who works as a global head for well-being and resilience and DEI at WePro, where she's responsible for more than 35,000 employees. Dr. Balasundaram is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and working towards destigmatizing mental health, thank you, and giving it the same parity as physical health. She received her doctoral degree in clinical social work from the University of Pennsylvania, where her research focused on the creation of a practice manual to help build resilience and self-esteem among adolescent girls raised in South Asian families. Next, a colleague for many years, Johanna Creswell Báez is a CSSW alumna. She completed her MSW with us back in 2006 and went on to get her PhD from Smith College. But she couldn't stay away for long. We welcomed her back to CSSW before this as manager of course development and as an adjunct assistant professor from fall of 2018 through the summer of 2021. Dr. Báez's research focuses on issues related to trauma, children and families, and immigration. And she has a particular interest in mental health support for immigrant youth, school-based mental health services, culturally responsive interventions, and qualitative research methods. Last and certainly not least, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Charles Lee, Assistant Professor of Social Work here at Columbia. Dr. Lee uses qualitative, mixed, art, and community-based and youth participatory research methods to investigate structural and cultural determinants of health and well-being among Black youth and young adults at risk and involved with the juvenile or criminal legal system. And through this work, Dr. Lee aims to develop knowledge and build theories that inform racially just and liberatory policies, programs, and practices that promote healing and healthy development among Black youth and young adults, especially young men, and lessen their risk for health compromising behaviors, arrest, incarceration, and recidivism. You are a terrific lineup of colleagues that I've had the pleasure to introduce and welcome here today. So I think we should dive in, and I think maybe I'll go in reverse order there. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Lee, and I'm going to give each of you a chance to answer this question, but just talking about your writing journey. So what would you say is your approach to writing? How did you learn how to write effectively, and how did you learn your strategies? So, Charles.
Thank you, Dean Begg, and nice to meet all the panelists and folks who are joining today. I would say that I'm still learning writing strategies. I think writing looks different every semester. But I never intended or for myself to be a writer. You know, my initial goal of pursuing social work was to become a school social worker. And that turned into me starting to work at a research and evaluation firm after getting my MSW. And that was my first deep dive into thinking about writing and how do we write about findings from data that was collected. I try to be pretty organized and use outlines but in some cases those don't always fare well with the types of things that we're writing. And so I'm trying to always think through strategies in which I can be more efficient, be more effective in how I'm writing, but also be collaborative in my writing approaches, especially with the types of research and communities that I'm working with. And I'll stop there.
That's terrific. Thank you. And you reminded me of outlines. I'm terrible at outlines. What I find I can do is do like a short PowerPoint. For some reason that I don't know why I can do that, and then I can write from there. But in any case, let me go across my screen as I see here. Next up, it would be Dr. Dupont-Reyes. Melissa, what are your strategies for effective writing?
Sure. I would say just practicing as much as possible. I see writing as a muscle that if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And the more I practice, I think the better I get as a writer, as you know, just thinking about it as a craft. I do consider myself a good writer because I keep trying. You know, it's hard. It's hard for everybody.
Yes.
But if you keep trying, you're already there. You know, you keep getting better. And some of the best tips that I got have been, you know, a little bit each day goes a long way, even if it's 10, 15 minutes, you know, every day that adds up quite a bit. And also to revise, give lots of time to edit. And again, the more you practice and you keep trying, the craft will get better and you are a good writer by definition because you are walking in practice.
That's great. So chunk it up and then revise. Good. It's a good tip. Dr. Balasundaram, Aparna, what would you like to add?
Well, first of all, thank you so much again, for having this session. So thank you so much, Adam and Chin, for kind of organizing this, and Dean Begg for asking the question. Really excited to kind of be here with all my colleagues. And when I kind of think of just to kind of I'm kind of zooming out and just kind of helping even just set context for myself and why someone like me is here. I think when I kind of look at my journey, my writing journey of the last 25 years or so, I kind of see it through three lenses almost. I think the first and most important to me is almost as a mental health practitioner. Where early in my career kind of started with just writing detailed psychotherapy case notes, creating psychoeducational materials for my clients. And, as I kind of grew in my experience, it kind of evolved to writing as a subject matter, expert in non-academic international publications, including, like the Reader's Digest, Women's Health, etc. Right? And I'll connect that back to the topic, that we're here for today, but I just want to kind of share that context. And I think the second lens is the academic lens as a social worker, right? Which started with, of course, thesis writing, which we all love, but thesis writing, proposals for conferences, and I think most recently contributing a chapter to a book. And the third lens, which is the most current, and I've been spending a lot more time on, is that as an educator. So again, writing, which involves writing curriculum, writing content, writing lesson plans, writing assignments. So that's kind of been the writing journey. And when I kind of overlay this across three aspects, right? I think in three different languages. So that's been a struggle sometimes when I write, because I'm thinking, in three different ways. I've never really had any formal writing skills or like a course or grammar like you'd have in the States, because I learned English in India where it was more British English, right? So and there wasn't any formal teaching. And I think the third piece, which has kind of fed into the successes as well as the challenges, has just been that the audience that I write for is also global, right? So it could be someone sitting in India, it could be someone in the US, and so hence the strategy I think is really for me, even before I start any writing, is almost zooming out and understanding my audience, right? Who am I writing for? In which am I writing as a practitioner, as an educator? So to me, just understanding the mindset, first of all, has really helped. So I'll pause at this point.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing into this all of these different, what I want to say, formats and audiences, right? That you have a different structure, perhaps, as you think all of those through. So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind as well. So thank you for that. And Dr. Johanna Creswell Báez, what would you like to add, Johanna?
I agree with all of my colleagues here, and it's really nice to be in community with everyone. Writing is an art, and when I'm writing, I'm looking to write for change, for action. So that social justice piece of our social work practice is at the forefront and centered. So I'm looking to move the thinking and some strategies. The first thing that came to mind was finding great thinking and learning partners that you can write with, right? The just writing with other people. And to me, that's a broad range, writing with my community partners, writing with students, writing with young and up and coming scholars, and learning from them. I'm learning just as much as it's a very reciprocal process. And that made me think about, I'm an associate editor for Qualitative Health Research, an international journal. And so I'm reading just a wide range every week, a handful of articles, and I'm learning from that too. So other people's work and in collaboration is important.
That's terrific too, because now when you say that, writing partners, that can mean so many different things, right? They're writing accountability groups, and they're writing partners who are actually co-authoring with you, and yeah, and then writing for change. I like the way you put that too. Thank you for sharing that. So I think we should segue into our main event here, which is to dive into this scary to some topic of AI and how we may or may not be able to use AI in our work. So I'm going to start with a basic question about how did you first become familiar with using Chat GPT or generative AI for your writing? And then I'll follow that up with, can you tell us a little bit about your process around that? And I will open that up. Who would like to jump in and tell us about how they've discovered this and used it so far?
I think one of the things, and as I was kind of thinking about it, right? I'm not really young, right? So it's not like it's something that came intuitively, let's say to my 20-year-old, right? It really wasn't in my landscape, of my work. But I think the fact that I didn't really have a set style or a set audience, that kind of opened up this whole space, because I was really quickly drawn to figuring out, was I able to tap into AI? Because I was always looking for ways to better understand my audience or my writing style. And so, I heard about my kids speaking about it, to be honest, right? Mom, have you heard about, this whole thing about AI? And I was like, well, let me check this out. So I think that was really the start to just kind of start exploring it. And once I kind of, looked into this a little more, it was fascinating, right? Because to me, it's almost like it acted as an equalizer in many ways, right? It didn't matter what my was, it didn't matter, what where, which, what the content was to begin with, right? So to me, it was almost a great equalizer. And I was very quickly, I was able to kind of learn that, even though I had the content and I was able to plug this in, right? So the essence was still mine, right? I was asking the question, right? The question had to come from me. However, the response then, there were various prompts that came up. So to me, it was almost my first learning was it's a great prompt generator. So it's almost like, I'd love to have a friend that I could, bounce ideas off with. But if I didn't have this friend/colleague to bounce ideas off with, Chat GPT almost became that thing that I could bounce ideas off, right? And I think as Dr. Lee, you kind of spoke about that, right? As you put in your prompts, the responses change. So you're also kind of educating, Chat GPT, right? So to me, that was one way that I looked at it. And I'll pause with that. If I could keep going on, otherwise I'll pause with that.
No, that's great to hear. And this notion of, you started off by asking the question and you could frame it very differently and to get different prompts is interesting feedback. Would anyone like to build on that or add another perspective? Yeah, Charles. Yeah, please.
Before this emergence of Chat GPT,
Yeah.
I was using Grammarly, which is another AI tool.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, primarily, sometimes when you're writing, it's difficult to always attune to sentence structure or grammar or things like that. And it's just great to be able to kind of just get things off my brain and on the paper. And so having Grammarly to support with the area that I was neglecting in my writing was helpful because it allowed me to freely write without having to stop my thoughts and to figure out, or is this the right way or to structure the sentence, or is it the right grammar that I might need to be using in that case? And so I think that was my initial introduction into AI as it pertains to writing, and really thinking about it from the basic standpoint of grammar and style of writing and things like that. And I think now that Chat GPT has emerged along with the many other
Yeah.
tools that can be integrated with Chat GPT, it's been really helpful, I think, for me to use Chat GPT that goes beyond just thinking about the role of grammar or things like that. And so some of the ways that I've tried to start using this particular tool is thinking about helping to brainstorm ideas, outlining, research papers, or at least get me a start to kind of think about what I might consider including as part of a paper, or explanations of different concepts or theories or summaries of articles. But it also links well with Zotero. And so in terms of capturing and summarizing literature,
Right. That's the citation tracking
right.
Software, right? Yeah.
Correct. Which is often difficult, going through
absolutely. Yeah.
literature to try to get some sense of what's happening, especially if you're writing in an area that's new. And so I think for me, it was initially just Grammarly, which I still use, but I've been starting to explore with ChatGPT a bit more.
And it never occurred to me that you could use it to summarize literature in linkage with Zotero. That's a really intriguing idea too.
There's so many things you can do.
Okay. Yeah, that is very cool. Oh, great. I don't know if Melissa, Johanna, if you wanted to add anything to that, or I can also ask if you're willing to share, an example of how you've used Chat GPT or generative AI.
Oh, I could talk about it in terms of a pitfall that I encountered, because I learned about it from students, in the classroom. I saw, policy starting to change at the institution, and some of my colleagues talked about using it for administrative tasks like producing a letter, but not really for scholarship writing, publications, grants, or anything like that. But I did come across, as a peer reviewer, some problematic writing that I detected that turned out to be predominantly using ChatGPT to produce a manuscript. And I used ChatGPT to ask it, did you help write this content? And it said, yes, I produced this content. And so, you can use it to see if to the extent that they were using ChatGPT, the writer, but it wasn't cited as such, and that, the editor in the journal has policies about this. So, it also it raised to me the ethical issue around writing with AI, but also wanting to take more workshops and figure out myself of how to use this or not as a tool in my own scholarship, because it is, it's here, it's being used, and rather than restricting the use of technology, I think we could embrace it as a tool, but need to really understand how to use it appropriately to avoid pitfalls, and consider the ethical considerations of using it. And so that's kind of been my focus now, is attending workshops as much as possible of how to use AI in my writing responsibly.
Yeah, I think it sent a whole lot of entities into a scrambling mode to say, oh, we need a policy, right? We have a policy at CSSW that you can't use Chat GPT unless it's specifically permitted. And wow, using the AI to detect the AI is like a whole nother level there. It's a little scary. Johanna, well, you're about to say something too. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I am using it about every day, all throughout
Really?
the day.
Whoa.
And just building off of what Melissa said, there is definitely this need for further training. And I am part of the network leads for our grand challenges for social work around harnessing technology for good. And we did a presentation at the Society for Social Work Research on how to use this, and the room was packed, right? I think people are,
I'm not surprised.
yeah, they're wanting these ideas. we also wrote a short paper on it too, and I'll put it in the chat if people want to follow up. And we tried to provide practical ideas on how we're using it and on how you can use it. I've also got an article that I'm working on right now with 5 other scholars, and we tracked our Chat GPT use all of last semester. And one of kind of preliminary data, one of the main things we were using it for is to support our teaching, lecture slide development,
Really?
yeah, curriculum. So I think lots of different ideas here. And in terms of my writing with it, I was working on a chapter on mixed methods research and social work and outlining it. And I wanted to know what are some of the top articles, right? This idea that Aparna and Charles talked about, this idea generator and almost a research assistant, I would have to say, right? And it provided me some great articles. Some weren't as great. Like, we need the human in the loop here in this. Don't worry, everyone. But the paid version, so I'm thinking access and equity, it's $20 a month right now for Chat GPT. So I'm concerned about that because I want my community partners to have access to this knowledge too. But that really gives you good academic articles right now at the $20 Chat GPT for.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick quick follow-up, Johanna? I'm curious about the slide development and the teaching and curriculum. Can you say a little bit more or give us an example on that?
Yeah, I was teaching policy, and my students were bringing some new policies to me that I hadn't heard about, and I was able, it's mining 5 billion or more data points, right? So I was able to say, can you think about it in terms of our anti-racist approach? Can you think about it in terms of healing-centered engagement, and blend some of these? It was, bringing things together, and it gave me new ideas for my slide development.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and the images too are amazing.
You
So
came
for
up with the images to go with them.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Are others of you using this for lecturing and teaching at this stage? You are. Aparna, how are you using it?
No, thank you. First of all, fascinating. I mean, I'm just learning so much just by listening to everybody. So I've used it twice, and I'll put a link, because one of those we actually put it in, on the website. So I'll put a link to that later. But 2, so I used it first for, a Hubsy course, and it was really, more to kind of get the students aware of the challenges of using ChatGPT. So I use it in both, one as a negative example, one as a positive example. So I'll start with the negative though. So we kind of use ChatGPT to generate a response to a social problem, that most of the world would agree has no merit, like domestic violence. So, we put the question in the chat during class, and we said, what are the pros of domestic violence, right? So of course, ChatGPT was very clear, and it said there is none, I cannot assist with it, there are no pros to domestic violence. So very clear, awesome, good. Then we put the next question and we said, what are the pros of gentrification? Right? So here is where, you could see a layered response. So ChatGPT at that point, I'm not sure what it says now, this was a couple of months ago, it says, there's a debate whether gentrification actually has any pros. However, there are some potential pros. And those potential pros then, of course, reflected a more dominant worldview, that speaks to our inherent systemic biases that exist. So in that sense, we were able to kind of discuss as a class. So I use this as a breakout discussion with the classroom. As you know, it depends on which lens we also view the world, right? When we look at it from a worldview, what does ChatGPT say? But we as social workers, understanding, the social work lens, here's how you've got to interpret what ChatGPT says, right? So just because ChatGPT is saying, sure, domestic violence is terrible, but gentrification, maybe it has some pros. How do we kind of, take that information and push back? So that was one example. And the students loved it, and the fact that we were able to bring in, something like ChatGPT in a classroom breakout session, it kept them engaged. So that was one example. Maybe I'll share the next example as we go along. I don't want to take up too much space. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the teaching or presenting uses of Chat GPT?
I didn't
Please.
personally use it in my classroom. I love the example that Aparna just shared. I think that is a wonderful exercise to do with students. Thus far, I mean, I do see it as a tool to be used, professionally in the job place, after being a student. But for now in my classroom, I really want students to develop their own writing voice. And so I think of this as a unique opportunity and time and space to do that. And then later on, maybe add ChatGPT or other, AI writing tools to integrate once they've developed that writing voice of their own. One of my writing inspirations is Gloria Anzaldúa. She has a quote of "Woman who writes has power." So, if we don't foster these voices as writers, especially of minoritized populations, I think there is some disempowerment there that can happen. And so I'm inspired by her and continue to develop my own writing voice and try to help students develop their own writing voices in the class, and then certainly encourage the use of technology, afterwards, once they've kind of had that foundation. So I've taken a slightly different approach, but it's more of just thinking about it in sequence and in your learning practice.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I agree with you too about describing Aparna's example is using it as a teaching tool to develop critical thinking, right? To be evaluative about it and to bring your lens, and social work lens to what you're trying to do. And I like the tie to empowerment. It's a good thing. So I have lots more questions, and some are coming in through the Q&A. So thanks to our audience for that. So I'm going to start to weave some of those in. And here's a great question I think that a lot of us are asking. Is the information reliable? And the person who poses the question says, I'm thinking of that example we read about in the papers where the lawyer used Chat GPT and it made up cases or something for them to cite. And so what is your thought about the reliability and how do you evaluate that? Yeah, Johanna, please. Yeah.
That the paid version, again, unfortunately paid, is having a lot less of these hallucinations that give you wrong information. So, OpenAI is continually iterating right now, and it's getting better every month. So 6 months ago, I'd say, oh, we're getting a lot of false answers. And now when I am using some of their plugins, some of their new GPTs where you can specifically turn them on, like a scholarly paper one, Scholar AI, that it's giving me all correct research articles and the URL linked to it, where 6 months ago it wasn't. So there's a development, and I can see that future of it getting better and better.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, sometimes they don't always give citations when you put in questions. And so I think to the point that was mentioned earlier, I think the technology is useful, especially in allowing you to be efficient and to search through so much information in a short time. But the human piece of this is really important as well because of the inadequacies within the system and, the responses not always generating real information. And it's kind of, they're drawing from so many different sources. And so it is important to have humans to check the quality of what's being produced before you decide to use it within any of your writing materials.
Yeah, that's coming up several times in some of your responses, right? That the human touch, that evaluative, critical review is essential to using this effectively. So that's worth underscoring. There's also a question that I think touches on something you just said, Melissa. In terms of developing one's own voice, someone asked, in my limited experience, I find it could limit my independence as a writer, and that makes sense to me. Are you leaning too much into this thing that has nothing to do with your own style? So I'm just wondering about all of our panelists, as you think about that, and as one develops their own voice and relying on Chat GPT, how do you balance those things?
Well, I learned to use it as sort of a free writing tutor, at my shoulder, but it's, online. And, you can ask it to Often what I'm challenged with in a manuscript, we have to compact our writing into 3,500 word limit or something like that. So I can ask Chat GPT, turn this 50-word sentence into 30 words. And then I'll still review it for the quality of the editing process, but it can help me be a scissor hands to my writing. I can also use it as a thesaurus. What is another word for something that I'm saying repeatedly in a paper, and I want to just jazz it up a little bit differently. I want to rephrase something that has been published, and I'm going to cite them, accordingly, but I don't want to use their language verbatim. So you can say, rephrase this concluding sentence that summarizes this work, and then cite, that original paper. Something also, it depends on the journal style, but some prefer prefer active voice, right? So self-writing and passive, you can ask Chat GPT, can you turn this into active voice writing? So I've used it as just like this free writing tutor, but sort of at this microscopic level of combing through in my editing process of something that I've already developed with my own voice.
I think that's what I was going to add as well. It's like, I think it's really, what is the intent of why you're using these tools? And I think thinking of it as an assistant rather than the lead or the one that's guiding your writing, I think is the best way to approach it. Because writing, as we mentioned earlier, is very, very difficult. And to have a tool that has many capabilities to improve your writing or to check, components of your writing along the way, I think is the best way to use it. And so you don't lose your independence because you're guiding that process, but just using these tools to help refine what you're doing and to ensure that you're covering your bases in a sense. But also helping you to be efficient, because searching through literature and finding literature is very, very difficult,
Time consuming. It's time consuming. Yeah. And I like your framing there, Charles, of, rather that it's not a ghostwriter, it's an assistant, right? Assistant editor, assistant writer at your side.
If I may just build on what's being shared, I know we spoke about the paid version for ChatGPT. There's another one that I found called Perplexity. I'm not sure if people have tried that out, but that actually gives you the citations and it's free right now. I guess at some point they'll charge for it, but right now it's free. It gives you the citation. So again, going back to the question of, how do we know this data is reliable? So it gives you, a synopsis, but it tells you where it pulled from. So I think, that, and then it again comes back to us as, as the ethical users of this material, are we bringing in our social work ethics when we engage with Chat GPT? So I think almost kind of coming back to even our ethics in our profession, using that lens keeps me grounded when I use Chat GPT, right? So I'm not running, wild with it. It's through that lens of my values, in my profession. The other piece that I kind of struggle with is, Chat GPT, whichever form you might use, is really feeding off the data that already exists out there, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the data that it's synthesizing is data that's not reflective of the entire globe, right? A lot of it may be more based in research that comes from one part of the world. So I think that's something you've got to be cognizant of, right? Then, okay, you know what? So just because Chat GPT didn't throw up something, research that was outside of, let's say, the US, right? I then still need to take that extra effort to make sure I'm searching for research that's not US centric, as an example. So that's the other way that I kind of, I've kind of learned to work with Chat GPT, but not, and I love what you said, not, let it lead the process. So.
Yeah. Is there anything you, coming at this from a different direction, that's really helpful to hear, but is there any type of writing task for which you would not use Chat GPT? Just say that that's not something I would apply in this particular circumstance. Is there anything you would rule out?
I haven't had great success with using it for citations, just to produce a citation list for me in any way. I think just having an in-depth working knowledge of your content matter, the methods that you're using, and citing, from the old-fashioned way, I guess, for me has been a more rigorous approach to not sacrifice credibility or an integrity in what I'm doing. Just as an example, I've plugged in a paragraph to Chat GPT and asked it, produce 10 citations to support this paragraph, having already done that myself. And the citations didn't match at all. I didn't recognize them. The quality wasn't really great. So I don't feel confident using it for that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's a good example.
One of the things that I need to do for my work is create like a point of view, right? So like if it's a point of view article, then it has to definitely be my voice. So that I found, it doesn't really work because it's not going to be true to my voice, and so absolutely for those kind of spaces, or even like student reflections, right? Been very clear that, student reflections, you've got to, reflect on that yourself as a person, because you also bring your own lived experiences, which ChatGPT will never be aware of, right? ChatGPT is not going to be aware of my lived experience. So anything that engages with lived experience,
Yeah.
one can't use that.
Yeah. We're getting a couple of questions that are touching on this idea of, this new tech tool perhaps getting in the way of human relationships or human brainstorming. And I remember reading an article once when the telephone came on the scene originally, that parents were concerned that their kids would lose writing skills. And then when we got text on the phones, parents were concerned that their kids would lose the ability to directly address their friends and they would do everything in writing. So I guess that's it's a reminder that every tech tool that comes down the pike, we're worried about what we're going to lose, while keeping in mind what we might gain. But for those in our audience who are concerned about, is this getting in the way of human interaction, and is the brainstorming going to be as good? I mean, how do you think about that? Do you think this is a risk, or do you think it's a risk worth taking, or some way to I don't know, mediate it?
I
Johanna.
definitely think it's a risk worth taking.
Okay.
My writing is taking a little bit longer. So there there is some, because I'm like, oh, maybe I haven't thought about this, or let me have it brainstorm a little bit more, in this direction. I do think as a tool, it is augmenting our thinking.
Okay.
And when I think about our younger generation, like we put a bunch of these bibliography tools in here, right? Are they missing out on how to learn APA 7th edition formatting? And then I think, like that's something that can be easily streamlined. Like I'd rather have my writers focusing on collaborating with that community partner, getting out change. So the streamlining is weighing heavier for me.
Yeah. And if I could build on that too, everybody should feel free to jump in on that same question, but you're bringing in another question that an attendee had posed with respect to how much efficiency do you think you're gaining from using this sort of tool? Is there a way to quantify that somehow? Or do you have a sense in your own work of how much time it might save you on a writing project?
I don't know if I can quantify it, but I think in response to your initial question,
Yeah,
I
please.
think I tend to be more strengths-based focused, and so I think we should be doing it rather than thinking about how do we take it away. But I think we're not going to, just like I mentioned earlier, industrialization, we're not going to prevent the digital age from emerging in the way that it has. And so I think, we
Right.
do ourselves, a better service by leaning into it and to finding ways that we can enhance writing or use it to enhance reading and so forth. And I think in terms of the efficiency question, it's hard to calculate from, but I think if even thinking about how long it can take one to develop annotated bibliography when AI could likely do that in less than 30 minutes,
Yeah.
And so I think, of course, there's still some checking to have to go to make sure that what's being produced is not fake and it's of quality, but um, it can be a huge time saver. I even thinking, there's discussions now where I'm a qualitative researcher, and so I'm thinking about there's steps to think about how do we use AI to analyze qualitative data.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're dealing with large data sets, like it can be difficult to have individuals going through and coding interviews that lasted an hour and a half, and you have a sample of 100+ people. But again, there's still issues that could emerge in that, and so there will still need to be some human in it. But I think we do a better job of leaning into it, understanding what those challenges are, finding ways to address those, but really thinking about how can this be, additive to folks rather than limiting their ability to, be independent agents in some way.
And I would add, I would absolutely 100% agree with Johanna and Charles. I think it's here to stay, right? So let's learn how to embrace it. How do you leverage it? And again, I'm just going to keep coming back to the ethics of our profession, right? So that never goes away. So this is built on a strong foundation of the ethics of our profession, and using that as a foundation, how do I leverage it, right? And how do I have those critical conversations even with my students? Sure, you could do this assignment in 10 minutes with Chat GPT, but think of the loss, right? I mean, you're here to learn, to study, to process, so it's going to be a loss, right? So I think almost kind of putting back that ownership of even building that learning community, to my students, because they co-own this learning space with me, right? It's their responsibility as much as it's mine. And whenever I've used that lens so far, the students have really responded positively to it, right? Because then they want to be part of creating that space collectively together. But yeah, I would completely lean into it, already leaning into it. And I'm just excited for, what else we could do with this.
Yeah.
Melissa,
yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to add, so if you think about, what are the types of writing products that you do, on a daily basis? So for me, it's manuscripts, grants, press releases, policy briefs, presentations. I journal just for, personally for practice, but also I use social media. So every time I write a post, that's writing. That's a writing practice that I'm engaging in. And so, Chat GPT, like, do I need to use that for writing a social media post? Probably not. It's probably not a use of my time. But so I've explored many different kinds of writing tools. I've done creative writing workshops. I've done op-ed writing workshops, which have been very helpful just to think about how to creatively write titles for things. I think op-ed writing it's a very efficient style of writing. So you learn to be efficient, how to draw audiences in. And then I've done, grant writing workshops, which is an entirely different style of writing, how to use Chat GPT in academic writing, how to create social media posts for science communication. I think the more writing exposure workshops and tools that you get, especially for the students out there listening in, it's a really great time to play and to explore all the different writing tools available to you, because different writing products will require different tools, and always your own voice.
Yeah. Charles, you were going to add something there too. Thanks,
I was just going
Melissa.
to add that we're talking a lot about Chat GPT, but that's only one type of AI generative model that could be used for these types of services. I know that I think they may have changed the name, but Google has something called Bard, but it might be something. It might be called something different now. I think they changed the name recently, but there's many different types of tools that can be used that operate in the same way that Chat GPT does. And I think I mentioned that to say to this last question, that to the points that were also made, is that it's here and it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. There's so many different types that we likely don't even know about. I think Chat GPT is just the more commonly known AI tool, but it's here to stay. And so the faster and the earlier we lean into it, the better.
The more we'll learn, right? And yeah, it's learning from us. But someone else commented, it seems like, it learns more from us than we learn from it. But I think that there's definitely a two-way street there. And I wholeheartedly, even though I've been slow to adopt, I definitely see the point, and we have to embrace it. And all new tools, I think, are subject to this level of skepticism, and then it takes a while to work out the issues, right?
One tool that I've used that I want to mention, I don't
Yeah.
heard it, HelenSword.com. There's something called the Writer's Diet, which I really like.
Oh, good. And people are asking here, about courses. Is there a way to take a course in Chat GPT or one of the equivalents, and how to use it for writing and research? I know, Melissa, you mentioned taking courses, or at least a couple of you did. Maybe you did too, Johanna, but are there courses you could recommend? And maybe we don't list them here, but we could maybe put something together and then send it out to as a follow-up to those who'd signed up. But are there things you would recommend?
I've only taken pre-conference workshops
Okay.
on
Okay.
this issue,
Okay. Yeah.
not a whole course.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's been, oh, sorry.
There you go. Go for it.
It's just been webinars. There's not like a standard course, but mostly like webinars,
Okay.
similar to this, but different ways.
Okay. Yeah. Johanna.
A plug for our Grand Challenges group.
Yes.
And I'll put the link in the chat. We've got
Yeah.
2 free webinars coming up.
Ah.
One is on Chat GPT in practice.
Mhm.
That's next month. And the following one, I'll put both of these links, is on Chat GPT and research. So we're trying to put some information out there. But I signed up for this was last semester. InStats has a bunch of online courses, and they had one on ChatGPT and research, and it was really, really helpful. So, and I know they're continuing with new ones.
Excellent. Okay. So maybe we, if you could put that in the chat now, and apologies to the audience. I don't keep up with the chat because too much going on, but I'm following the Q&A.
I was going to say, I just
go ahead.
added a link to
Oh,
someone's
good.
Twitter page in the chat that I've been following, and
Yeah.
they actually put out a lot of information about different tools. They also offer trainings and other different things that I found to be helpful. I haven't used all of them just because it's overwhelming, but I tend to follow them to see if there's any latest,
Yeah.
innovations that may be coming out in relation to AI.
Yeah. Great. There are a lot of great questions coming in, and we're not going to get to all of them. I think I'll probably take one more that's come in, and then ask each of you to share some closing thoughts as we bring this to a close.
Can I have to run to another session.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
If I can just conclude by saying thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to talk afterwards if folks have questions or comments about any of the content that was shared.
We're so grateful and glad that you could join us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Take care. So there's a question that has come in that touches on the issue that's come up a couple of times, because this is a social work school, and that is the issue of social justice. And this notion perhaps that we're leaning into these tools as a way to prioritize speed for getting things done, versus allowing or expecting rigorous long-term projects. And what are the implications then for social justice if in fact you do accept the premise that this is prioritizing speed in some sense?
Can I just say that I don't think
Please.
that prioritizing speed is necessarily a bad thing for social justice, because
Okay.
social racialized issues are happening constantly.
Yeah.
Just like last semester, things have happened and are ongoing that where we need to be efficient to respond to some of these things that are happening. And I think, again, these tools can be useful for this. And I think from a justice-oriented, equitable standpoint, I think separating or having different capabilities for the free versus the paid version is a bigger issue to me. It's like, well, why doesn't everyone have access to
Okay.
these different tools? Because they do different things. There's GPT, there's GPT 3.5, 4, and there's many different versions that do different things. And I think that's the more inequitable issue rather than this whole concept around efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Johanna.
I was also
Thanks,
thinking
James.
about some of the Chat GPT 4 capabilities where you can feed it information right now. So I am feeding it, articles on healing-centered engagement when I'm asking these questions. So I am training it to have a keen eye towards social justice. So I think there's that piece as it continues to develop, is that you can feed it information, or I'm feeding it some of my previous writing around some of these social justice topics and say, you know, in this style of writing, can you help me think about this question? So I'm trying to like embed it and put it in.
Yeah, it's a sophisticated approach. Aparna, did you have anything you wanted to add in terms of that social work lens, social justice?
I don't see it as competing with that, or that it's a choice one over the other. To me, this is almost like it's actually going to free up more space in my mind and time and in my day to actually do the work that matters, right? So I'm getting off some of the administrative, the clerical, the searching, because that's not necessarily my skill as a social worker, right? My skill as a social worker is in my clinical skills, my practice, my macro work, my advocacy, my teaching. So this frees up the space to do the real work. So that's the way I'm approaching it right now. I'm not sure if things will change going forward, but that's the lens that I use right now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughtful responses. That's really good to hear. And I know we're getting close to the end time, so I would like to give each of you an opportunity to share some closing thoughts, whether it's something we touched on that you would like to emphasize a little more, or something that we just didn't get to in this very interesting conversation. And so I will open the floor to you. Who might like to go first?
Play around with this. Check it out.
Fun.
So
Yeah.
just, dip your toe in if you haven't yet. If you have, expand it and take some ideas from what you're hearing, what you're reading. I mean, it's definitely in the news at this point. Like I was reading a Wired article this morning on Chat GPT now having memory, that it remembers what you've said and integrates it. So wherever you're at on the spectrum of curiosity, technology curiosity, try to move yourself to that next place.
Great advice. Thanks, Johanna. And yeah, Aparna, why don't you tell us what you're thinking?
Yeah, so I think if there's students out there, you can't use this to replace your assignments, right? So I just want to put it out there that the school does have an entire policy on that whether you can use it or you cannot use it. So you want to make sure you aren't, because then it's plagiarism, right? So I just want to kind of put that out there if there are students in the audience. But otherwise, outside of that space, if I was to park that aside, completely with what Johanna said, she said all that I was thinking of. So really nothing to add. Just experiment, have fun with it. It's almost it takes me back to when I was really young and learning math. We had to memorize our multiplication tables, right? And sure, maybe there was some good to it. Right? My dad forced us to do it, but I use a calculator now. I mean, I'm not even doing mental math anymore, right? While there may have been some good to it. So the point is, if you're using it in an ethical manner, you're freeing up that space, but when you free up that space, what are you going to use that space and that time for?
Right.
Right? Am I going to be playing a video game, or am I nothing wrong with video games, or am I going to use that in a meaningful manner? So that's something out there.
Oh, well said. Thank you. And I took the opportunity to put the CSSW academic policy on AI in the chat. But Charles, you get to have the last word.
I started first.
Yeah.
No, thank you all for having me. This was great. I was a little nervous at first because I'm still exploring AI, but I think from a writing standpoint, I think one thing I wanted to say to end is to write every day. At least 30 minutes. It'll improve your writing. It keeps you focused on what you're doing. And block out that time in your calendar ahead of time. And don't schedule anything during there. And as it pertains to AI, take additional trainings and webinars, learn, explore, like was shared, but also be cognizant of what you input, especially documents. If you're looking to put a document in of your writing, just because we're still learning, we don't know who's going to have access to some of those things possibly. And so especially if it's dealing with private, consent information, you want to be conscious of that. And lastly, I encourage instructors to continue to find ways to integrate it with your teaching, and to also, as you learn, to help your students to learn how they could use it to enhance their writing in their courses. But that's all I want to say.
No, it's a great way to close us out. So thank you. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Aparna. This was great. Thanks to Melissa, who had to leave us a little early. But it's been a delight to be with you. I've learned a ton. And you can see, I've got the chat here now. I can see there's a lot of appreciation for all of your very thoughtful and creative ideas that you shared with us today. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks.